we talk about is going to be related to the Bible, though, okay? I'm not going to get up here and, tell you my life story. But we are going to be outside the Bible. But we're going to start with the Bible. And we're going to relate everything to the Bible. But you're going to see how it relates. But you're just going to have to give it some time. And let's ask a very interesting question. Is Jesus mentioned outside of the Bible? Now, I don't mean right now. I don't mean did someone post about him today. I mean in the ancient sources around when he lived. Isn't that an interesting question? You know Jesus is mentioned in the Bible, right? He's kind of like the star, right? But what about other places, other people during those times? Now, as we look at ancient sources and Jesus Christ, let's first look at the Gospels. And yes, we are going to go to Luke 1, so hold your finger there. Okay. This is the life of Jesus right here. Okay? Am I about to turn it off? Okay. What's that mean? Where's the sensor? What happens if I do something? It's going to turn off or? Okay. See, okay. Okay, my goodness. So here we are, the life of Jesus, approximately 1 to 33. Now, technically, because of some things with the timeline, it's actually about 4 BC when Jesus was born. It's a long story. Just so you guys know, there is no such thing as 0 AD. It goes 1 BC. What's BC? Before Christ. And 1 AD, I'm going to answer for you so no one makes a fool of himself. Anno Domini, which is Latin for in the year of our Lord. So it's just saying since Jesus was born. That's all AD means in Latin. BC is before Christ. So 1 BC is 1 year before Jesus was born. Although there's problems with the calendar, so technically he was born about probably 4 BC. But you get the idea, right? Approximately his life is 1 to 33 about. Okay? This is in the 1st century, this time. Now, this timeline is contested, but this timeline, I believe, can be defended and is most faithful to Scripture and is accurate. When were the Gospels finalized? We don't really know absolutely for sure. There's even books published in the modern era, and if they don't have a publishing date, we don't know exactly when they were finalized. I'm talking about books published in the 20th century, even books in the 21st century. It seems as if Mark was first. It's called Markan priority. Mark most likely was first. Do you guys see the date up there? About 45 to 50. This is when it's finalized. Luke, 50 to 53. Paul, he quotes Luke, 53 to 57. That's why we're going to put Luke prior to Paul, because Paul's quoting Luke. You understand? Luke writes Acts. So he wrote Gospel first, then he wrote Acts, around 57 to 60. And one of the reasons it has to be before then is because it has to be before Paul dies, because Luke ends with Paul still alive. Understand? Then we have the deaths of James, Peter, Paul, the siege of Jerusalem, so no more temple destroyed in 70 AD. That's a big date. Now, all this could be finagled with. This is in general, but if this was Religion 101 at your local university, they would not put this timeline up there. The timeline would look way later. They would push it back as far as they can because they want it to be far away from Jesus' life as possible, basically. And they'll say, but there's good reasons. This is wrong. This is religious perspective. But like I said, there's good reasons, and we're not doing dating of the Gospels tonight. But the point is, these are all written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. If you watch the Da Vinci Code, they'll say, there's so many Gospels. There's like 85 Gospels. None of those Gospels were written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. These are. Do you understand how significant that is? If you're going to have eyewitness accounts, you got to be written within the lifespan of the eyewitnesses. Now, after that, though, we get some non-New Testament sources for Jesus. Now, these don't tell us a bunch because the Gospels do that, but they tell us a little. I'm going to show you a few. Josephus mentions Jesus. Tacitus, Phlegon, Thales, Marabar, Serapion. We're not going to do them all tonight, But these are all before 200 AD, and we can learn a lot just from these historians. These are non-Christian historians who wrote something about Jesus. Maribar Serapian's more like a philosopher who wrote a letter, but it's included in that way. Here's what we can learn from Jesus just from these sources outside the Bible. Understand? He lived in Judea. He was a virtuous man. He had wondrous power. He could predict the future. He was a wise king. He's explicitly called that in one of them. He was accused by Jewish leaders. He was crucified by Pilate. Tacitus mentions that. It was during the reign of Tiberius. Tacitus mentions that. There was darkness and an earthquake. Phlegon Thales talk about that. Reportedly rose after his death. Josephus talks about that. Believed to be Messiah, called the Christ. Josephus mentions that. His followers were called Christians. Josephus mentions that. And this superstition, the superstition that he started spread. The Romans called it a superstition. The Romans weren't real fond of Christianity. They called us a superstition. Meanwhile, they gave sacrifices to Mars, you know, and their gods, Venus and all their. It's like, bro, who's the superstitious one? You're the one looking at entrails of, animals to find out if you should go to battle. You guys know they did that? They would cut open an animal, look at it, be like, should we go to battle day? The liver says yes, and they would. No joke. I'm talking about the great generals would do stuff like that. Now, let's take a look at some of these. But before we do that, let's take a look at Luke. Okay? Luke chapter 1. Are you guys in Luke chapter 1? Okay, this is called Luke's prologue. Everybody, prologue. It's like the thing before the thing, right? The prologue is. You guys understand prologue? It's a thing before the big thing. Like in the Marvel movies, they'll have a fight scene, and then they're done, and then it'll put the character's logo up all of a sudden. Ant-Man. But something's already happened. It's not the beginning. That other part was the prologue. It was the thing before the thing. You understand? This is the prologue to Luke's gospel. He's like, before I get into this, let me tell you a little something. What he's going to do is tell you his methodology about how and why he wrote this. When he does this, he's letting you know he is writing a history. Verse 1, inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as those who from the beginning were, what's that word? Eyewitnesses. Everyone say eyewitnesses. Good. And servants of the word handed them down to us. It seemed fitting for me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write it out for you in orderly sequence, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty about the things that you have been taught. There's a lot there. He's telling you what's going on. Let's look at verse 1. So, does he recognize that other people have written down some of the things that Jesus said and did? Doesn't verse 1 say that? Do you guys see that? He might be referring to what Matthew, John, and Mark are doing. They may not have been completed yet. We don't know exactly. He doesn't say who, does he? But he's recognizing there's other documents about Jesus' life. Do you guys see that? Maybe he's talking about at least Mark, but he says many, so it seems like, okay, there's got to be more than Mark, it seems like. You guys catch that? Now, one other thing. This section right here is written in what's called something akin to classical Greek. Most of the Bible's written in Koine Greek, 2 different types of Greek. It's like, you ever heard someone talk English and you don't know what they're saying? It's like there's different forms of Greek. Classical Greek is like the Greek of the elites. This section is written educated. The rest of Luke is not as highfalutin. You see what I'm saying? So he's like letting you know, I got the bona fides. I'm a professional. Here we go. It's high Greek, this part. So he's saying they've also written an account of the things that have happened. Verse 2. He says, from the beginning, they were what? So he's talking about people who had seen these things happen. He's not talking about hearsay, is he? So then verse 3, what's he say? Having, it seemed fitting for me as well. What do your guys' translations say? Mine says, having investigated everything. What's yours say? In verse 3, the second line. There we go. Having followed all things closely. What are your guys' translations say in that part besides that? Okay. So do you guys see what sense do you get by what he's doing there? Do you guys see that? This isn't a dream or a vision he had. He's saying, I've been looking into this. And since he mentioned eyewitnesses, and in my translation, I like the way they use the word investigated. Do you think Luke talked to eyewitnesses? Absolutely. And in fact, can I share something with you? You know all those little sections in Luke where the angel comes and talks to Mary? And then it says when the angel leaves, do you guys remember what it says? Mary did what? What? Mary what? So the angel will talk to Mary, for example. The angel leaves her. Or Jesus is in the temple. And then it says Mary blanked these things in her heart. Cherished or treasured. You guys remember that? It'll say Mary treasured or cherished these things in her heart. Now, how would Luke know that? How would Luke know what Mary treasured in her heart? There's an go ahead. I'm asking you guys. How would he know? He talked to Mary. Do you guys understand? How would he know Mary's private thoughts of her reaction to something? So this shows you at least one of the people you would know he would have to have interviewed, because he would have no way to know her private thoughts about her reaction to being visited by an angel. Do you understand? So he would have interviewed Mary, for example. That's one example I'm trying to show you. So he's interviewing eyewitnesses because Luke doesn't claim to have been a disciple. Do you guys know Luke was he's not one of the 12. He comes later. He's a doctor, almost certainly a Gentile. Travels with Paul, but he's not one of the 12. So he wasn't there, you understand? But he doesn't act like he was there, does he? He says, I investigated these things and talked to the eyewitnesses. Do you guys understand? This is not just a vision or a dream. Muhammad met an angel in a cave, he says. Joseph Smith went into the woods and prayed. The angel gave him the Book of Mormon. This is, I investigated to talk to eyewitnesses. You understand the difference here? So this is important when you look at this. You understand this is different. This isn't some hallucinatory, experience that he had. Investigated everything carefully from the beginning to write it out for you in orderly sequence, most excellent Theophilus. That's a proper name. So he's writing this. Most likely, there's a person who sponsored this, meaning a Christian, or an early Christian, who had some means and sponsored him to be able to do this. How does this get paid for? All the materials were expensive. This stuff costs. So he's probably getting Theophilus his first copy. That's why he's addressing it to Theophilus. Theophilus may not even be his real name, because Theophilus essentially means one who loves man, and maybe code name saying this guy's essentially a philanthropist. You understand? For the gospel. So that you may know the certainty about the things you have been taught. He's saying, I want you to know the truth for real, man. Do you guys see this? This is why we can go to non-New Testament sources, but this is the place to be. They're just going to be supplemental or corroborate. They're not where we get our primary information. Do you guys understand the difference? So let's take a look at a few here. You guys want to do that? Well, there's a lot, and we can't look at all of them. All these people from the ancient world, within the first 100, 200 years, say something about Jesus. Some I've already mentioned to you. I have some dates on there. Almost all these, in some way, someone will contest. For example, with Celsus, they'll say, well, yeah, Celsus did, but we don't have Celsus' original writing. We have someone quoting his work, so it's no good. Now, that's true. The way we have Celsus is because someone else quoted his work. But that standard is not how it works. Just because someone's quoting the work, and that's the way we have what's left of the work, doesn't mean we don't have the work. The question is, if we have a reliable translator of that, then we have the work. There's other ancient documents from the world that's from the ancient world that's how we do have them. Someone else quoted them. You understand? So on the left in the yellow, those are non-Christian sources that mention Jesus. On the right are Christian sources, but not New Testament. So these are early Christians. And they got some of the names and some of the dates there. And they mention specific historical things related to Jesus. Now, we can't get into all those, but let me summarize it. One of my favorite guys on this topic is Gary Habermas. And I want to show you just a little helpful quote. He has a book called The Historical Jesus, and here's what he says. I won't do it in his voice. He's from Detroit. He's an older man. He talks like this. While some believe that what we know almost nothing about Jesus, but I won't do it. While some believe that we know almost nothing about Jesus from ancient non-New Testament sources, this is plainly not the case. Not only are there many such sources, but Jesus is one of the persons of ancient history concerning whom we have a significant amount of quality data. He is one of the most mentioned and most substantiated lives in ancient times. Now, that is correct. What's weird is, though, who was Jesus? So don't think about Jesus as the Son of God for a second. You're a pagan Roman right now, okay? Who would Jesus be in your mind? There could be different answers to this question, by the way. But if you're a pagan Roman and you heard about Jesus, what would he be to you? You don't believe he's the Messiah. You probably don't know what that is. What would Jesus be to an ancient Roman? Rabble rouser? That's so good. Jesus was definitely viewed as a troublemaker. That's one of the main, because they didn't really care about Jewish religion, but they did care about the peace, Pax Romana. That's one of the best answers. That's one thing. So he is a rabble rouser in their mind. But that's not all. What else would Jesus be? Prophet. So they might say to the Jews, some Jews thought he was a prophet. They might understand that. That's a very good answer too. That's exactly true. He's a peasant. He's not part of the elite. Not only that, he's a Jewish peasant. He's a Jewish peasant. They're like, this Jewish peasant is God? He's a king? How did he die? So what would they think about his death? Yeah. What's a Roman cross mean? You did something really bad and you got embarrassed for it. You died naked in front of your friends and family, the most painful, excruciating death that they could come up with, because the message of the cross is don't mess with Rome. Now it's Jesus saves, but it used to be don't mess with Rome. And they're like, he's a criminal, peasant, Jewish rabble rouser. That's your king? What? Come on, man. So they're not going to write a lot about him unless he makes significant waves. And that's what happened after his death. That's what's so interesting. Most of the things we hear about Jesus, well, really all of them from non-Christian sources, they're after his death. Because that's when they're like, okay, now what happened? What happened in the first century in Jerusalem? Understand? Very interesting. So try to put yourself in the sandals of a Roman. Now, believe it or not, there's still some people who go around saying Jesus didn't even exist. I debated one a couple weeks ago. This is Malachi Z. York. He has no credentials or anything, but here's what he said in one of his videos. He's a cult leader. You fall from faction into fiction. There's no historical facts anywhere that there was a man named Jesus 2,000 years ago. There's no facts. So when you align yourself with fiction, you can't claim your sovereignty. What he's saying, if you believe in fiction, it results in separation, factions. You get it? But there's a lot of people besides Malachi Z. York who claim Jesus didn't exist. But don't you kind of want to know, what do mainstream historians say about the existence of Jesus? This is just the existence. I introduced to you Dr. Bart Ehrman. You ever heard of him? Is he a Christian or not? Yes, he's a lapsed Christian and one of the biggest Christian critics of the New Testament and the Bible that exists. He was on Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, talking about how the Bible's got Jesus all wrong. This is what he does for a living. Dissing the New Testament, right? Here's my point, though. Bart Ehrman, who is a critic of Christianity, a critic of the Bible's accuracy, a critic of Jesus' credentials, he still knows Jesus existed. He wrote a book about it because he was bothered by people saying Jesus didn't exist. He's like, look, I don't believe in this stuff, but you can't say he didn't exist. Here's just one quote from his book. Jesus existed, and those vocal persons who deny it do so not because they have considered the evidence with the dispassionate eye of the historian, but because they have some other agenda that this denial serves. He's saying they got other reasons because the evidence shows Jesus existed. Now, remember, what's crazy is he's not the only one who says that. These are books by atheists and non-believers, all who wrote books about the existence of Jesus. And none of them believe in any of this stuff. They're just like, yeah, he definitely existed. You understand? So when you watch a YouTube video and they're like, Jesus never even existed, it's YouTube crankery. It's you need to find out what's really going on there and realize these people are way out in left field and there's good answers to all their questions. That's why there's hardly any major historians who believe it. There's a lot of YouTubers who believe Jesus never existed, but not a lot of historians. Okay, let's go to some non-Christian sources about Jesus. Let's start with some Jewish sources. And first, I bring a quote to you from Biblical Archaeological Review. It's a good magazine. This is a professor emeritus from Purdue, Lawrence Maitiuk, and he says this, quote, this is in an article called Did Jesus Exist? Jewish rabbis who did not like Jesus or his followers accused him of being a magician and leading people astray, but they never said he didn't exist. End quote. Understand that? Saying that's not one of the criticisms. Now, how do we know what a Jewish rabbi might have said about Jesus, though? Anybody know the place we would have to find that information at? Besides the Bible here. Yes. Can you say it louder? The Talmud. That is the answer. It's from the Talmud. The Talmud is a document where a bunch of rabbis talk to each other about everything under the sun and then record their opinions and then made a book out of it one day, basically. That's the short version. But in the Talmud, there's rabbinical discussions about Jesus. There's a number of them. Some of them are super messed up. They say really messed up things about Jesus. Like his son, he's a bastard son of a Roman soldier named Pantera and all this stuff. That's one. You know, he wasn't born a virgin. His dad is actually a Roman citizen. He can't be the Messiah, Roman soldier, you know. But here's one thing that's interesting in the Talmud, they say. This is from Sanhedrin 43a, and it says this. On the eve of Passover, they hung Yeshua. Now, everything in the Talmud doesn't line up with Scripture, meaning there's stuff they say about Jesus that we're like, that didn't happen. But there's other stuff that corroborates what happened in Scripture, such as on the eve of Passover is when Jesus was hung on the cross. That's in the Talmud. So we see Jewish criticism, but we also see some corroboration from non-believing Jews, including the big one, Josephus, most important historian of the first century in Jerusalem, Josephus. Now, there's some challenges with the passage Josephus has about Jesus. If I explain them to you, we would be here all night. But just know, everything I'm telling you, there's someone online who will debate it. This is kind of the point. But there's good answers to all their charges. So I'm just telling you the intro. So it's not like he left that out. No, we can only do so much, people. Okay. But in Antiquities, this is Josephus, one of his works, the sources up there. He wrote this around 94 AD, 96 AD. Josephus wrote this. This is a quote from a Jewish historian, you understand? At this time, there was a wise man who was called Jesus, and his conduct was good and was known to be virtuous. And many people from among the Jews and the other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified to die. Now notice, Josephus has Pilate in there. Do you see the corroboration? We don't need Josephus. We have the Scripture. What I'm showing you, there's outside sources that corroborate, and they're within the first century. It's not going to be like now, where you have a Facebook post and 5 seconds later there's a video. The distances between the event and the recording are going to be greater in the ancient world. So you have to understand the way things worked then. But within 100 years, that's a good time to have evidence for something. Alexander the Great, important guy, more important to Jesus by secular standards, right? His first biography, I think we don't have until like 400 years after his life. That's a huge difference. That's a massive gap. And yet Jesus, within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. Continuing on with this quote, those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion. Notice he says they reported it, so he doesn't believe it. And that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. So he's saying some people thought he was the Messiah. Josephus also wrote about James. In fact, Josephus wrote more about James than Jesus. Who is James? Yeah, half brother, right? But Jesus' brother. You can just say brother. It's fine. I'm just reminding you, Joseph was involved with one, but not the other. So this is interesting what he writes about James. He says, James, quote, was brought before James, it's talking about the Sanhedrin. And in this, he's describing what happened to James. It says this, brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James. So he's saying James got brought before the Sanhedrin. By the way, James did get in trouble. There's evidence of his persecution, and it's also in Josephus' Antiquities. But notice he gives a passing reference to Jesus. He's saying this guy was called to Christ. Not that he believes in it, but he's saying basically the so-called Messiah. Understand? Meaning when he mentions James, he mentions Jesus in passing. By the way, which is more evidence that the other passage about Jesus is authentic, because some people doubt its authenticity, because it wouldn't make sense if he mentioned Jesus but never mentioned him prior, because you wouldn't know who he's really talking about. It puts it in better context. So that's in Josephus. Now, there's more there, but let's skip over to the pagans, the Greco-Roman world. You understand that the world Jesus inhabited was filled with Romans who were in charge, spreading a combination of Greek and Roman culture. Sometimes it's called the Greco-Roman world. You guys ever heard that term, Greco-Roman? That's kind of the culture that he was in, okay? So let's find out what some of them said. First, let's look at a guy named Tacitus. And guess what? I have Tacitus. This is the ancient Roman historian Tacitus. Now, I can't read in Latin. This is in English, people, but this is a translation of Tacitus. And you can turn to the page with the pink notes and see right there, oh, he talks about Jesus. Now, he talks about Jesus and the Christians a lot. I'm just going to show you one little section, okay? This is from Annals 15. And actually, that's a copy of Tacitus on the screen, and that blue section is where Jesus is talked about, okay? Their originator, so he's talking about the Christians, their originator, Christ, had been executed in Tiberius's reign. So who was the Caesar when Jesus was executed? Tiberius. How does Luke and I think Matthew, how do they open up their gospel? They say during the days of the reign of what Caesar? Tiberius. Do you see the corroboration? So the important thing with that is it also gives you a date. Now you have a span of time. Tacitus is a Roman historian. This isn't some Christian. In fact, he doesn't like Christians. You'll find out here in a second. Executed in Tiberius' reign by who? The procurator of Judea, Pontius Pilatus. Again, corroboration. But in spite of this temporary setback, he's saying the leader being killed, their deadly superstition had broken out again. Now that's fascinating. If your leader's killed, what possibly could make it spring up again after the leader's death? Resurrection! And they got excited because he rose from the dead. It's funny, though. He calls it a deadly superstition. It's like, hey, you guys are the ones who killed him. It broke out not just in Judea, where the mischief had started. So he calls Christianity mischief. But notice he gets the origin place right, doesn't he? Where did it start? The region of... Do you guys see that? But even in Rome, he's saying it's spread all the way here, man. First, now he's talking about how Nero, the emperor at the time, this is the emperor responsible for the deaths of Paul and Peter. Nero had the self-admitted Christians arrested. Their deaths were made amusing. And he talks about how Nero would light them up as human torches to light his garden at night for his garden parties. And he would put them in sacks. and have animals attack them while they were in there, or put snakes in the sacks with them in the arena so the people could be like, yeah, get the Christians. This is stuff they were doing. And of course, some were crucified. Why do you think you would crucify a Christian? Oh, you like Jesus? That's your guy? You want to be like Jesus? I'll help you be like Jesus. You get to die like Jesus. Another Roman who mentioned ever so briefly, oh, there we go, is a Greek satirical writer named Lucian of Samosata, lived from 115 to 200, wrote a book maybe around 169, The Death of Peregrinus, or The Passing of, and he totally mocks the Christians, but it's kind of funny what he says. Remember, he's a comedy writer. So here's what he says. The Christians, worship a man to this day. Wait a minute. Hold on. Stop right there. I thought that Jesus's worship and his divinity was invented at 325 in Nicaea, wasn't it? Isn't that what they told us on the YouTube video? But yet, this says he was worshipped. When's this guy writing? In the 100s? He already knows Jesus being worshipped by the Christians. You guys see that? And he's making fun of him for it, right? The Christians, they worship a man to this day. The distinguished personage. So he's mocking him by writing this way. The distinguished personage who introduced their novel rites. He's saying this, this weirdo who introduced the weird stuff they do. You guys understand what he's saying there? And was crucified on that account. Another guy gets the death of Jesus right and says Jesus introduced new stuff. But I thought he was just telling them to keep the law. Sounds like he was bringing something new, and even the pagans knew about it, huh? For having convinced themselves that they are going to be immortal and live forever. You convinced yet, brother? Let's convince ourselves, guys. So he's mocking them like these fools think they're going to live forever, so they're going to go get themselves killed. Is that what it is? Right? They've convinced themselves they're going to. Now, why would you think that, though, if you follow Jesus? Oh, resurrection. You guys understand how the gaps are explained by the resurrection? You guys see that? The poor wretches despise death. Isn't that dope? He's saying that they didn't care if you would kill them. The poor wretches despise death, and most even willingly give themselves up. They wanted to be martyrs for Christ. Furthermore, their first lawgiver persuaded them that they are all brothers of one another. So he's like, these people think they're family. These weirdos all think they're family. And they're going to live forever. What's up with that? After they have transgressed once for all by denying the Greek gods. But wait a minute, I thought Christianity was a ripoff from pagan religion. But here he's saying the way you became a Christian is by transgressing the Greek gods. Oh, it seems like he understood it was something different than the Greek gods. Notice how he views what they're doing as sin. They transgress the Greek gods. You guys catch that? And by worshiping that crucified sophist himself and living according to his laws. Sophist, let me tell you what it is. A sophist is a person who makes bad juvenile arguments using simple tricks to deceive people. He's basically saying that poor philosopher who only could deceive idiots. So you can see his disdain there, right? He calls him a crucified sophist. But do you guys see how much he's affirming about the life of Christ in this little section, mocking Christians? Do you understand? This is an early source attesting to what we've been saying all along. Do you guys see how significant it is? Let's take a look at just a few more because we can't do them all. So don't worry. Don't worry, guys. We only have one and then one. We're only doing two more and they're shorter. This is Marabar Serapion. Now, he's a writer. We don't know exactly when he wrote. Some evidence would indicate 75 AD. That's not 100% sure. He seems to be a philosopher type who for some reason is in jail. And he's writing letters, I think, to his son. We don't know the full background, but we have his letters. And it's so fascinating. He's giving like his final advice to, I believe, his son that he's mentoring here. Or Or is it Serapion? Hold on, now I'm getting confused. Is it Serapion's the one writing to Maro? No, Maro, no. Whichever way, it's a guy writing to his son these letters, okay? Okay, so anyways, here he's getting him to realize the importance of valuing wise leadership. So here's what he says to the person he's mentoring. You ready? What did it avail the Samians to burn Pythagoras, since their country was entirely buried under sand in one moment? Or what did it avail the Jews to kill their wise king, since their kingdom was taken away from them from that time on? Notice how he's tying the death of Jesus to the fall of Jerusalem, which Jesus predicted. It was 40 years after. Now, people who don't agree with this passage say, but it doesn't say Jesus' name. But ask yourself, who else is he talking about? So that's what I mean by the debates here. Socrates is not dead thanks to Plato. He's saying that his teaching lives on. Nor Pythagoras because of Hera's statue. Nor is the wise king because of the new law which he has given. He's saying it doesn't do any good to kill these leaders. They'll live on through the teachings of their followers. So don't go unnatural. Let them be, basically. Notice again, 2 in a row are referred to Jesus as a new lawgiver, meaning something new. It's not just Moses, and even the pagans realized it. Oh, that's something. Now, I'm going to end up with one more quote from Gary, Dr. Habermas. I know you guys can't see this, but he's a fun guy. He's an expert in this topic. If you go online, there's a video of me freestyling to him. It's pretty lame, but it's also pretty funny. It's when I had my afro. And he has a book here where he examined these sources. All of them, though, not just the ones we covered tonight. And here's what he wrote in the conclusion. You ready? We have examined a total of 45 ancient sources for the life of Jesus, which include 19 early creedal, 4 archaeological, 17 non-Christian, and 5 non-New Testament Christian sources. From this data, we enumerated 129 reported facts concerning the life, person, teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus, plus the disciples' earliest message. There can be little doubt that this is a substantial amount of pre- and non-New Testament material for Jesus' existence. In light of these reports, we can better understand how groundless the speculations are that deny his existence or that postulate only a minimal amount of facts concerning him. Now, what he's saying there is we looked at all this data and combined it, and we can know a lot about Jesus even from outside the Bible sources. Now, I'm going to close there. I'm going to stop there. I'll tell you a little bit about next week and then take some questions, okay? I know this is a different type of study, but I think it's important sometimes, and I'll tell you why it's important too. Next week, we're going to talk more about this. We're going to bring in some archaeology. We're going to look at a couple more Bible passages. I don't mean I'm going to have statues with me, but we're going to see some pictures. But archaeology, it's still good. It's good. It's still good. It's still good. And then I'm going to actually play a little video clip where you're going to see someone talking about some of this stuff. And so you're going to see, oh, okay, I see what he's talking about. And this is helpful in so many ways. This is helpful when you go take a religion class at ASU. This is helpful when you turn on PBS, the History Channel, and they're saying, well, Jesus actually was a space alien who died in India. By the way, there's people who really say that. I don't make stuff up. This is what they made up. And you can be like, no, the Gospels got it right. Luke was very careful. And why do I want to believe inferior sources? And ancient sources corroborate what the New Testament says. So I don't need to believe Jesus was a space alien who died in India, or whatever version they want to put to you. Now, with that, I know tonight was a different type of Bible study, but we have a few minutes. I'd like to get any kind of comment on this, any kind of question, because there was a lot we ran through. Anything at all regarding this that maybe popped in your mind when we were going, because I try to give us a little time at the end. For example, anything that was unclear when we were going through, you say, what was that one part?
My question is, because there's so many discrepancies with these that long, where actually are there going to be all the information?
When you say there, you mean who? You mean critics of the New Testament?
Yeah, maybe that's,
Or like you're saying, like which people? Do you mean people that deny Jesus lived, or the people that? Well, so there's a few things. Let's say I'm an atheist, right? And I'm arguing with Christians. I could argue against the existence of God, no doubt. But if I want to just throw the Christians all off, I just tell them, well, Jesus never even existed, because Jesus is the foundation of Christianity. If he didn't exist, he certainly didn't die for your sin. And he certainly didn't rise from the dead. So it's like nipping the problem in the root right there in a way. And so I kind of think that's what's going on with atheists, because just like Bart Ehrman, who himself is an atheist or agnostic, he'll say, he said there's always another agenda when someone goes around saying Jesus didn't exist because the evidence is so strong. Now, I think Bart Ehrman himself, as a non-Christian, has another agenda with how he reads the New Testament. In a way, everyone has. We should all recognize we all have bias. The question is, are our presuppositions or bias, are they correct or accurate? That's what we got to do, is keep on checking those. But some of that is simply because you want to attack the foundation, is because you have a dislike for what the religion is or whatever. But yeah, you got another question, Susie?
I don't understand. Well, I do understand. I do. It's just I'm seeing the Testament Christians. I want to know, like you told us, plenty of sources.
Well, no, Gary Habermas is on our side. He's saying the data matches the conclusions of the Bible. Here, let me help you out. I got something that might help. With that part, what he's saying is that we also have early Christians. It's not part of the New Testament, but early Christians who wrote, and they were close to the time of Jesus, and we can learn stuff from what they wrote as well. That's part of what he was saying. But the other thing he's saying is Tacitus. This is an ancient historian, an ancient Roman historian. Talks about Jesus, corroborates the New Testament. Josephus, first century Jewish historian, talks about Jesus, corroborates. Pliny, we didn't get to mention him. He's a politician, but he talks about torturing Christians, and he gives information that we can learn about it from there when he writes to the emperor about the information he gleaned. Suetonius, we didn't get to get into him, but he's another historian who also covers some of the same material that Tacitus covers. He mainly has a book called The Lives of the Caesars. And so he talks about what they did during their reign. So these are ancient historians who have things about Jesus in them, but their point's not to write about Jesus. They mention him in passing, but we can learn some from what they mention in passing. And so Habermas was saying that stuff matches up. Now, everything doesn't match up. For example, in the Talmud, it says that someone went about for 40 days before Jesus' death saying, hey, if anyone wants to give evidence to vindicate him, let us know and we won't kill him. Well, that never happened. So people say, oh, so the question is, why are the discrepancies? First of all, remember the Talmud's later. So we're looking for corroboration of earlier sources. We don't let the later source throw off the earlier source. But if you say, why would that be in there? You can think of a motivation, for example, to make it seem as if the death of Jesus was justified because it was an unjust trial. So someone might write something like that in there to vindicate his death, as if, well, it was justified and we gave him a fair shot, when we know they didn't. You see what I'm saying? So you could explain the contradiction there. Sometimes it's just bad information. In other cases, like one of the guys, Suetonius, misspells Jesus' names as Christus. But that was a common thing. The Romans, a lot of times, they didn't know exactly what they're hearing, and so they would say Christus. That's a common thing. Some of the Christians talked about it. They're like, yeah, you call us the Christians, but we're okay with that because in Latin it means good. So you're still kind of right. Some of the Christians talked about the Romans. So it's still talking about Jesus. They just misspelled it because critics were like, oh, it's not the same guy. It's misspelled. Well, the Latin guys, they were hearing it, and so they got it wrong sometimes, but we have evidence the Christians talked about them misspelling it, so we know it was a thing. So it's the same guy. That's that kind of stuff. But those are good questions. I know this is a lot, but you got to understand, the point is, now your faith is not rooted in Suetonius, Tacitus, and all that. But notice how all of them point back to the death of Jesus. And that's where your faith is. They recognize that was important, but they recognize for some weird reason this superstition that was mischievous and dangerous to them was still growing. And you know why? Because people saw Jesus rise from the dead, and they believed in him. And we do the same thing now, not because of these books, but because of this. But isn't it nice when every now and then one of these books corroborates what's here? Do you guys see that? That's helpful. Yes, Crystal. Mhm. That's good because, yeah, you realize it's not a myth. It's not a fairy tale. This is something that happened on our planet for real. And it would have just seemed like another Jewish peasant getting crucified on a Friday, and yet it changed the world. And now our calendars are marked as Anno Domini. Now, if you go to school now, they put CE. Anno Domini is too sectarian, so we put CE. What's CE stand for? Common Era. What does that mean? When did it start? Well, it starts with the birth of Jesus. Oh, so it's the same time, just you put CE now? You guys, common era, that don't mean nothing. It just means, since Jesus' birth, but we don't want to say that. Yeah. So, okay, good. Let's end there. So we're gonna have another good time next time, I believe, and show a video and do some stuff related to this, but also show some archaeology. And yes, we'll hit another verse or two related to this as well. And I hope that was helpful for you guys. Yes, thank you guys. In Jesus' name, be blessed this week.